This sacred is not just an idea for every node. This sacred is a lived experience. This sacred is not imaginary, but it is a universal truth of life. That's how you see, after the movie Kantara, it has become very apparent to people that every community develops its own way of perceiving, accessing, and living the tattva of the sacred. And it is represented by a devata whose its pursuit is developed with great precision and sophistication. As you can see in the movie Kantara, there is an exclusive priest family that pursues this, the sacred experiences, and it creates it for the entire community. It's not just for themselves. Their sacred is completely lost because their sacred came from the, uh, uh, living in the forest, so that is lost.
Yeah.
Two, they are no more a node because they are distributed and they are just assimilated into the cities.
Yeah.
They don't retain their performances. They may retain their consumption to some extent. Both their B and C, they may retain to some extent. But if they are not living as a community, A is not possible. A is gone, completely gone. And ritual will significantly reduce. So in their case, in the case of tribes in the industrial era, the destruction is at all 5 levels. Not just destruction is at all 5 levels, node itself will not reduce. So in the modern life, there are two kinds of problems. On the one hand, the node itself is destroyed. On the other, the node may significantly weaken in spite of. Now, whether we will be able to reconstruct a complete network is kind of not clear. But what may happen is that we may be at once in multiple nodes. That is what is happening. Because if father will be in police, mother will be, in the telecom department. So already you have PCARS of two different communities.
Namaste, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Indic Talks organized by the Center for Indic Studies. Today, in continuation from the last talk we've had with G.V. Shivakumar ji on Purushartha, we will be continuing it, talking about In the Light of Purushartha, a Theory of Communities. Our speaker, Shivakumar GVG, is a director and Guru Sadhak Sachiv at Indica. His responsibilities focus on Indica's critical mission to cultivate leadership. He guides initiatives to serve gurus, perpetuate their legacies, enable leaders committed to IKS to become influential thinkers, institution builders, and public leaders, and bolster the broader IKS ecosystem. I welcome you, sir, and I request you to take over.
Thank you, Risvi. Namaste, and welcome to all of you. In the previous session, we made a deep dive into the notion of Purushartha in terms of understanding how that has shaped Indian thought. What is it derived from? Its relationship with the Srishti Sthiti Laya, and how navigation of life happens through Purushartha. How is it that an individual in modern times can develop a personal vision using Purushartha, and what is how to create a trajectory in relation to people around us, families, friends, and communities. So it was centered around the individual in the previous presentation. In this presentation, we will look at how using Purushartha we can explain the communities, especially the Bharateeya communities. And We will also explore if there is a possibility to develop a theory. So this is not a theory yet, but are there baby steps towards theories that can explain any community? That is the objective of this presentation. Next slide, please. So we'll ask these critical questions that will help us move forward. First, with respect to Bharat as a civilization, what explains the enormous diversity we have in life, which includes communities, community practices. In general, there is so much diversity in creation, in what people create. It's not the same across. More importantly, all of this has been happening and evolving over millennia in harmony. So the diversity has not harmed itself either. Elsewhere, we have seen adjacent communities in constant fight and one seeking to annihilate the other. However, while not denying conflicts, how is it that there is still a higher degree of harmony over millennia with so much diversity? First question. Second question is, how has this survived the onslaught of modernity, monotheism attack, the industrial dynamic? Industry constantly seeks to keep on shifting the ground. So how is it that it has still survived? Then we will come to the next question. That is, as presented in the previous presentation, if Purushartha is the fundamental pursuit of life for an individual, is it also the basis of communities? Consequently, is it also the basis of diversity too? 3. If that is so, is it possible to build a generic theory of communities based on Purushartha that explains Indian society and communities, which helps create a model that then becomes the Bharateeya lens of communities, which may also have certain instruments that can help us build future communities in the industrial era. This is the crux of this presentation. The claim is not that we will answer all these questions to a sufficient detail that results in a valid theory, but the claim is that we will build the building blocks of a theory using which the fraternity, the Indian social sciences fraternity, can explore building, constructing a complete theory. Next slide, please. So this is the most important slide of this presentation over which everything else is built. There are 5 categories of experiences in life. The first category is performative experience. That is, we do things. We walk, we cycle, we hammer, we run, we jump, which are very rudimentary experiences. We also build theories, which is a much more deeper level performative experience. So life is all about doing various things at various levels. That is the perform. A man enjoys such performances. A man enjoys surfing for the heck of it. Similarly, the man enjoys mountaineering for the heck of it. Similarly, some people enjoy building theories for the heck of it. Not necessarily all the time they are useful, but man is compelled to do something from within. And that to do something, there is something natural to a man. At the same time, the community and the civilization and the times shape certain performances. So it's a combination of Swabhava, Swadharma, and Kaladesha Vartamana. That is how a performance gets constructed within the individual. Two, we consume. Everybody consumes. We consume air, we consume water. We also perform emotions, we also consume emotions. We consume food, we consume entertainment on TV. We we consume we consume many experiences. You know, the experience of watching cricket in the stadium is a sort of consumption, while eating lace sitting in the stadium is also consumption. So consumption also happens at multiple levels: rudimentary, sophistication, so on and so forth. So these are the most universal things that are there across the world. Yet life is so different everywhere. Why is that so? That is because geography itself builds some diversity. You can't get the same material everywhere, so consumption performance becomes different. But having said that, that alone is not the difference. Societies develop something called aesthetics to a performance, which is very different. So the aesthetics of cricket in India is different from the aesthetics of cricket in London. Similarly, aesthetics of election performance is different in India from the West. So even the aesthetics of cycling is also different. The aesthetics of every single performance is different in different countries. So that brings enormous diversity. But that's not all. The performance also results in objects being created. When we program, we build software. When we are performing in large manufacturing industries, we build material. So there, as a consequence of performances, we also create something as an output, which requires skill and knowledge. So performance has another dimension also. And every time we create something, it creates more performances. When we create a laptop, new kind of performances come into being. Because we are able to build a PPT, we are able to build a video. So there is and that we consume. When we consume that, we demand more performances. And that results in another kind of object. So there is an infinite loop between performances, creation, and consumption. Often, this results in excessive youth. Climate change is a consequence of this infinite loop. So there is a disharmony in the cycle between performance, object, and consumption. That Bharatiya Samskriti has understood very well, and it has sought to temper it through aesthetics so that we reduce our performances in limitation, and we reduce our consumption also. So thus, several consumptions are aesthetized to be done only at specific points in time, festivals, and so on and so forth. So we have smartly used aesthetics to bring a, a temperamental control to performance and consumption. This India has done extremely well, while other civilizations, even though they have aesthetics, they have not been. Modern industry also has aesthetics, but it doesn't cut the infinite loop, vicious cycle. It rather enhances. The aesthetics actually makes you consume more, whereas Indian aesthetics actually takes you away from consumption. Why does Indian aesthetics take you away? Is because we have mastered rituals in such a manner that we make everything, including manufacturing, you know, a ritualistic organization that our performances and consumption don't lead to infinite cycles. Thus, you have communities which are anchored on building great material, but they don't suffer from the performance and consumption life cycle loop. So, India has mastered the art of using aesthetics and rituals to control performances and consumption without killing, richness. We don't demean wealth, but we still take away the over focus on performance and consumption towards aesthetics and rituals that creates a different kind of beauty and joy. Thus, we have several ritualistic performances that need very less material but still are highly joyous. So the joy is distributed in India much more. But more importantly, the aesthetics and the rituals are also directed towards the sacred, a Devata culture, which is based on renunciation. So even in renunciation, we have created beauty and joy, joyful experience, due to which our reliance on performance and consumption for joyful experiences is reduced. This is the beauty of Bharatiya. While several communities across the world definitely have this balance in the past, in the pre-industrial era, but they've not been able to develop aesthetics and rituals aligned to sacred, effectively tempering performances and consumption. This is the pinnacle of this achievement has happened in India. Now, what is its alignment with Purushartha? Performance and consumption are aligned with Arthakama. Performances require skill and knowledge. Performances results in objects being created. Now, this tempering that the aesthetics and rituals do to performances and consumption, aligned with renunciation or sacred, is the equivalent of dharma and moksha. So it is the aesthetics and the rituals that actually initiate a dharma dimension in the civilization, and using which we have built so many things. So it is the Purushartha perspective that elevates performances and consumption towards aesthetics, rituals, and renunciation. So we are a civilization of aesthetics, rituals, and renunciation that temper performance and consumption so that an individual can strive for Purushartha. If this is the hypothesis, then what does it mean for a community is the key question. On the one hand, we have explained Purusharthas. On the other hand, we have explained the two key experiences. We have also explained how three other experiences elevate them and temper them and control them without destroying the overall joy of life. We've also explained what is the relationship between these five experiences with Purushartha. So basically, five real on-the-ground experiences aligned with our philosophical worldview of Purushartha. Now, if this is how it is for an individual, what does this mean for a community is the question that we are asking. Are we in a position to explain Bharatiya communities using this framework? Are we in a position to draw a generic lens of communities? Are we in a position to use this to define any community in the future? That is the question that we will be answering minimally in this presentation. Next slide, please. So here we talk about a model to represent a community. First, certain basics. So beyond the individual, Bharatiya Sanskriti has realized two social institutions with longevity and effectiveness. One, family, that is the extended family. Second, community. Now, several civilizations share this success, but few come close to what we have achieved over millennia. And we have withstood the onslaught of, you know, the individuality of last 300 years. So the family and extended family will be outside the scope of this presentation. We'll talk only about communities, which has three levels. Fundamentally, we are a Kula-oriented community. That is, a collection of families become a smaller community called Kula, and a collection of Kulas become a Jati. This distinction being lost is one of the reasons why we have lost the ability to explain our civilization. We should have retained the ability to say what a Kula does, what a Jati does. We are unable to do that today. Then we also have another phenomenon. Kulas and Jatis further aggregate into higher forms, or they develop a strong interface between them. One of the two happens. So, Bharatiya Samaj can be imagined as a network of communities. And this presentation will refer to that as a community graph. This organization helps us draw theories from modern computer science, modern graph theory, and we can apply that in future. If we represent our society in this structured way. So the purpose of this presentation is to represent the Bharatiya Samaj as a community graph and see if some possibilities emerge to build a model and a modern theory. Next slide, please. So the community graph has the following features. We'll have a small diagram in the next slide to describe this. Every node in this graph is a community. Every node is defined by 5 entities, which we already described: performances, consumption, aesthetics, ritual, and sacred, which for the sake of this presentation, let's call it as PCARs. Which means we are saying that every community shares a unique set of performances, consumption, aesthetics, rituals, and is aligned to a particular sacred. Every node has some of this exclusive to itself. So there is no two community that has absolutely the same PCARs. Something or the other will definitely be different, which is a observed reality in India. Even within the same Jati, if they are living in two different districts, you will see some performances, some consumption, some aspects of aesthetics, some rituals changing. That is the beauty of a community in India. And if it is living adjacent to another community and it has an interface, there will be something in common between those two communities. This is another feature. So the edges in this graph represent relationships established between one node and the other. So the nodes can establish as many relationships as possible with other nodes. And it's not uniform. Some nodes have some communities have a higher number of relationships with other communities. Some other communities have a lesser number of relationships with other communities. Important thing is every edge also, just like every node has performances, consumption, aesthetics, ritual, and sacred, every edge also has that. Now we will first take a look at the diagram to understand this and then come back and see if this is valid and if this is intelligible. So let's take a look at this community graph. In this community graph, every node is a community. Every node has PCARs, which is a performance, community, consumption, aesthetics, ritual, and sacred. So the hypothesis is that no two nodes are exactly the same in their PCARs, which means either they differ in some performances. That means that they have a different set of skill set, knowledge, profession, and what they create as object, as output, and or they have a different set of consumptions. The same two jatis in two different districts may be having different food habits, may live on different kinds of material, and so on. They will have different aesthetics. The way they wear dress may be different, or the way they their festival aesthetics can be different. So in multiple dimensions, the way they perform weaving, the aesthetics of weaving can be different between the same two weaving communities into different districts. Of course, it will be different between a weaver and a boatman. The same two jatis or two different jatis will have different rituals, and the ritual is not necessarily a sacred ritual. It can even be a materialistic ritual. In the way they they perform their entire profession can be highly ritualized. What the families coming together can also be significantly ritualized, and that also will change from a weaver and a boatman depending upon their profession. A different kind of ritual will emerge. Sacred rituals also, the way they do their puja also will be different. And sacred being different means they have adopted a different set of devatas. A boatman will have, Ma Ganga as the ultimate devata, whereas a weaver will have a different kind of a devata, and so on and so forth. So that is the characteristic of a node. As you can see is here, some nodes have very high degree of edges with other nodes, which means their relationship with other communities is very high, which means they have a shared performance or a shared consumption, shared aesthetics, all of at least one shared performance, one shared consumption, one aesthetic shared, one common devata is a very commonly observed thing if one has seen on the ground. So what is unique about this is that this diversity is a consequence of every node having unique PCARs, and at the same time, every node having something shared with an adjacent node. That is the unique thing. Now, this explains why in Bharateeya Parampara we have the same theory. It's the same theory. PCARs is the same theory, but we also have a highly integrated society in spite of this diversity. That is because this performance, consumption, aesthetics, ritual, sacred, based on Purushartha, which is based on Srishti Sthiti Laya, is integrating this entire society. So what drives diversity is exactly the same thing that is also driving an integration of this society. It's the PCARs that is driving the diversity based on Purushartha. It is the same PCARs that is driving integrity based on Purushartha. That is the beauty of this society. And this model is able to capture this phenomenon and explain it in a wholesome manner. Can we go to the previous slide now, once again, so that we can walk through and understand this slide? Yeah. So as discussed, every node in this graph is a community. Every node is defined by 5 entities, PCARs. Every node has some exclusive PCARs unique to itself. some shared PCARs with other nodes represented by an edge. Edges in this graph represent relationships established by one community with another community. Nodes can establish as many relationships as possible. Between two nodes, there exists exactly one edge, if at all exists, which means there is a unique relationship. Every edge too is represented by its own PCARs, meaning that two communities can share performances, can share consumption, meaning they eat together, or they have the same kind of eating habits, or they exchange material. They have same, at least some shared aesthetics that brings an integration between adjacent communities. That's how you see in a small town various jatis living together with some integration, because there is some PCARs that unites them. And there is significant difference between this jati in this town and the same jati in another town. Because when jatis live together, they develop a shared PCARs. Next slide. So now we will say, how have the Bharateeya communities evolved? In this framework, every node seeks autonomy. Every node seeks to live in as much isolation as possible, which means every node develops its own performances through which it produces material for itself, but it also produces material for other nodes, which means a community creates for itself and for other communities. Every community that is a node consumes material to sustain. It provides for itself in three ways: creates by itself, imports material from adjacent nodes, that is communities, to create by itself, or import consumable stuff directly from adjacent nodes. In all these three ways it happens. Every community that is node develops its own aesthetics to temper its own performances. This is important. And consumption to avoid overruns. 5. Consumption. The sacred influences everything and permeates itself in everything. That is, the sacred influences the rituals to further temper performances and consumption. What does the ritual do? This is an extremely important point. A ritual does two things. One, it keeps the community together. There are so many rituals that just bring communities, that is, people within the node or the community together. That is the only object. The second dimension of a ritual is to ensure that it gives access to sacred experiences, which takes them further in the direction of moksha. Now, exclusively binds itself to a unique sacred. That is, this sacred is not just an idea for every node. This sacred is a lived experience. This sacred is not imaginary, but it is a universal truth of life. That's how you see, after the movie Kantara, it has become very apparent to people that every community develops its own way of perceiving, accessing, and living the tattva of the sacred. And it is represented by a devata whose its pursuit is developed with great precision and sophistication. As you can see in the movie Kantara, there is an exclusive priest family that pursues this, the sacred experiences, and it creates it for the entire community. It's not just for themselves. Thus, the sacred creates the ritual. The ritual influences the aesthetic. The aesthetic further tempers the mundane performances and consumption. Thus, in this pursuit, a node develops its own unique position in isolation but develops interfaces with others because for the pursuit of its performance and consumption, it is always dependent on the other. And at times, even it is dependent on aesthetics and rituals partially for the other. So in this mutual dependence, the entire community graph grows. So here, but important thing once again to be highlighted is what drives the diversity is PCARs, but what integrates all this diversity into one is also PCARs. So it is the same thing that drives both unity and diversity. And that is a unique phenomenon of Bharateeya Parampara. Next slide, please. So if this is the model, how do we define a healthy community graph? A healthy community graph is one where every node is allowed space to operate with its own PCARs, with as much security, comfort, independence, and autonomy. No node is seeking actively to override the other node with its PCARs. No proselytization is happening. That is the first aspect of a healthy community graph. The second aspect is its material dependence. Every community has a material dependence for performance and consumption, are highly balanced by its own providing for others. That is, no community is merely drawing material for its performances and consumption without offering something for others' performances and consumption. So this is a balanced community graph, that every community is doing something for the adjacent communities. The more you do for the adjacent communities, the more your value in the entire community graph. Second point is minimal connectedness. No node or no community is allowed to drop out of this graph. So if a community is dropping off from this graph, it means that there is some problem in the larger society. It has happened. It will continue to happen. The striving of Bharatiya Parampara is every time that drop happens, whether it's for good or bad reasons, to pull back and bring back the community back into the network. So thus the graph strives to be what we call as minimally connected. It's a formal term in the concept of graph theory in order to be healthy. Third, entropy reduction. There is at least one sacred entity common to nodes living close to each other. This is a very important way in which Bharatiya Parampara has grown. I may disagree with you in my performances. I may have conflict in consumption. I may have aesthetic difference that may lead to conflict. I may have ritualistic fight, but I will not have a sacred fight. This is how Indian fraternity has grown. That is, adjacent nodes will actively honor the sacred on either side. This is non-negotiable in Indian culture. Whenever this has been violated, there has been very deep conflict in India. So what unites is not just the PCARs. What unites is the elevated value presented to the sacred and active honoring of sacred of everybody by the other. It doesn't mean that I am daily worshipping the other's sacred, but I'm actively honoring. So all the conflicts in TCAR is completely dissolved in the sacred. This is how Bharatiya Parampara has evolved. This is why every time after a conflict, it gets resolved in Bharatiya Parampara. This is called the entropy reduction. So ideally, the two adjacent nodes must share a complete PCARs. But that may not always happen, but minimally a sacred is always shared. That's how you will see in every small town in India, different communities will have one shared sacred devata. But the same two jatis in two different places, in the other place, a different shared devata will be there. This is how Bharatiya Parampara has grown. Next slide, please. So material completion and balance. These nodes living in close proximity ideally have different material dependence between each other. That is, if node 1 is dependent on node 2 and node 3 for some consumption C1, then between node 2 and node 3, there ought to be some other consumption C2. That is, there is no load being put on the same material. That is an extremely important thing. If 5 communities are living together and all of them are drawn to the same material for their own consumption, then very heavy load is put on it. But the way Bharatiya Parampara has grown is that different communities will develop different consumption dependencies, and thankfully, that is the driver, material diversity driver, and that has evolved in the system. So this is material competition balance. It reduces competition. Otherwise, material is always less, and there can always be very significant conflict. That's how you see people in the same geography. For some, coconuts will be of extremely high sacred value. But within same geography, for some other community, a different material will be of higher value. So this is how the whole thing evolves. Sacred anchoring, there is a healthy density of nodes exclusively dedicated to sacred anchoring and ritual making. So this is another important thing. You will see that there is always some community that anchors in sacred practices for other communities around also. Because the sacred anchoring requires 24/7 practice. Ritual design requires 24/7 practices. And this is not just a Brahmana thing. In across different jatis, you will have sacred anchoring and ritual making being anchored by specific kulas or specific jatis who are experts in that. And because of them, the sacred anchoring will be accessible to other communities also, which are not practicing sacred pursuits, creation of sacred pursuits. They're importing sacred pursuits. So this dimension is what has resulted in a birth-based continuation of professions and inheritance of practices. Because some things require a 24/7 and a collective of families to continuously be performing together. The last point is called entropy balance. That is, greater the performance and consumption relationship between two nodes, greater the ritual and sacred relationships between other nodes adjacent to them in the same vicinity. Please note this carefully. What it is saying is that if two nodes have higher interdependency between them on performance and consumption, they will develop higher material power. How do you balance that out? Every other community cannot have the same material power or material creation offering to other communities. That is unrealistic. Always there will be two communities that will produce more, that will share with each other, that will depend on each other. Then they will create a power center. However, there are always the other nodes will always balance in ritual offering and in the sacred relationships. This is how the balance is struck in Bharatiya Parampara. So if you are not offering the material or performance, you are offering the ritual and the sacred or the aesthetics, due to which your value is there within the same shared lived ecosystem. Thus, there is a distributed contribution of performance, consumption, aesthetics, rituals, and the sacred in a fraternity across communities, which results in a balance. So no node that way suffers an imbalance. Because I'm offering ritual, I get back something in the material. Because I'm offering the aesthetic, I'm getting something back in the material. So nobody gets to overpower PC between some localized communities. Now, this is the what is the model that we can build for the that explains the Bharatiya Paramparas, Bharatiya society. The great between two nodes in a shared in the same lived ecosystem can offer higher performance and consumption. That is, if there are two powerful communities that are creating a lot of material and that are creating higher order performances and they are sharing between each other, then it can create a significant power imbalance in the region, because Artha Kama will always create a power imbalance. However, the design of the system is such that other nodes, that is the other communities in the same area, will develop, will offer rituals, aesthetics, and sacred services in such a manner that they establish their value in the ecosystem, due to which they will in return they will get material. So that's how you see that in uh, towns there are very poor communities which are not performing or consuming much, but they get what they want by offering uh, non-performatory, non-consumptive services through aesthetics, rituals, and so on, and keeps the entire ecosystem bound, and they find their value. So when you cannot offer through performances and consumption, you offer through sacred ritual and aesthetics, and you find your relevance in the ecosystem. That's how, even without material wealth, communities are able to live in a honorable manner in this framework. Of course, in the modern industrial era, all this will come under severe strain. But traditionally, this is how the societies lived and resolved their conflict, and created interfaces for them with other communities. Can we go back to the diagram now? So with this, we come to the end of the presentation. Now we will look at the community graph and then revisit all the points that we made for ourselves. As you can see that a healthy community graph, there will be no node that is dropping off. Although all the nodes that have just one edge are still under risk. So, they're not, their interfaces with other nodes don't exist. So there is always that risk of that node suffering or dropping off. So somebody within the fraternity will keep an eye on that node. Or when there is a conflict, that node drops off, there is a serious conflict, and over years that gets resolved also. That is one. Two, there is always some node that is anchored on ritual and sacred and ensures that everybody else gets access to ritual and sacred, because it's a very specialized service. As we said, sacred anchoring is the most important thing here, because whenever there is a difference in everything else, it's the sacred anchoring that completely solves the problem. The integrity is because there is an absolute complete regard for all sacred, even when there is disregard for PCAR. So that is a key design feature. So as you can see, all the features that we explained as to how the entire community functions, society functions, we are able to explain it with the same concept of performance, consumption, aesthetics, ritual, sacred, applied both to the node and the edges. So the node, when we apply this concept to the node, it creates diversity. And when we apply the same concept to the edge, it binds the same diversity into a singular whole. So what drives diversity is what drives unity also. So unity and diversity in unity is happening through the same thing. While everything else is important, the performance, consumption, aesthetics, ritual, sacred ensures that there is an experience distribution is balanced. The anchoring feature of this entire community network graph is the sacred, because when everything else changes, The sacred is mutually respected, and a common sacred is always strived for. The first and foremost thing between two communities is that a common sacred is strived for. After that, you develop other common things. So this is the model of a community and a society that emerges from the Purushartha. And this, it not only explains it explains why we have, the four varnas. It explains why we have kulas. It explains why we have jatis. It explains how unity is there. It explains how diversity is there. Diversity is there at 5 different levels. It is there at PCARS level. P diversity and C diversity will just overflow, but it is balanced by ARS. We have explained how the infinite loop gets, controlled. Thus, we have a potential, a model that can move towards a theory. And we have a hypothesis that can be further evolved. It is for the social sciences fraternity of India to take this model and see if there is a possibility to evolve it into a complete theory that explains all our conflicts, that explains all our civilizational features. At the same time, the PCARS model helps us think of any community. If we apply this to communities in Europe, what happens? Do they have shared performances? Do they have shared consumption? Do they have a shared sacred that they mutually respect and strive for? Do they strive for mutually shared sacred, or do they strive for mutually shared performances? So it offers us a framework and a lens to view uh, any community. At the same time, it offers us to imagine our modern institutions are the communities. Can we say that the IAS fraternity has a unique PCARS? Do they have a shared PCARS with IPS? Do they have a shared PCARS with IRS? Do they have a shared PCRS with state administrative officers? Do 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 the software engineers have a shared PCRS with any other adjacent living manufacturing industry? No. Today, no. Absolutely no. Industry doesn't have S itself, right? So we have a framework and a lens to view both the traditional communities as well as modern potential communities. Tomorrow, if we want to create a new community, can we think of what must be the right PCARS model for them? So we have a language and a vocabulary and a structure to be further evolved. Of course, it has to be validated. It has to be tested with ground experiences and for inconsistencies, consistencies, and whether it has a potential to be taken forward. But at least the worldview of Purushartha and Srishti Sthitilaya offers us this framework that minimally explains what we have experienced so far as Indian life. Future will be seen. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that talk, sir. We'll shift to the question and answer session now.
Yes, please.
So, you talked about the parts of communities where no nodes are meeting, so they are at the verge of extinction. Now, what
Extinction,
comes
dropping
to,
of suffering, maybe
yeah,
extinction also towards that.
maybe. So what comes into my mind when I thought about extinction of those nodes? So jati wise, I think a lot of tribes that are going away from their culture because they have been told that development means to have a phone in your hand. And then there are so many pottery artisans, whether it's in Andhra or Karnataka, the Bidri ware and all of that, they are going away. So that is because the maybe the artha part of their purushartha is something that is not being facilitated by our society today. So it seems that those jatis which form communities are then going to go extinct. So how exactly do we make sure that
So
there is
there what is happening is that their sacred
Mhm,
is completely lost, because their
mhm,
sacred came from the um, uh, living in the forest, that is
Mm-hmm.
lost.
Yeah.
Two, they are no more a node because they are
Mm-hmm.
distributed and they are just assimilated into the cities.
Yeah.
They don't retain their performances.
Mm-hmm.
They may retain their consumption to some extent. Both their P and C, they may retain to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
But if they are not living as a community, A is not possible. A is
Mm-hmm.
gone, completely gone. And ritual will significantly reduce. So in their case, in the case of tribes in the industrial era, the destruction is at all 5 levels.
Mm-hmm.
Not just destruction is at all 5 levels, node itself will not reduce. So in the modern life, there are two kind of problems. On the one hand, the node itself is destroyed. On the other, the node may significantly weaken in spite of surviving. Both is happening. Third thing is happening is that as urbanization increases, the network itself will not exist. It will become complex, disjoint,
Yeah.
or over aggregated. Several nodes will come together to form a much larger node to which you don't even know what the PCARS is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it leads to what industrial life has, what has industrial life done to this network is another presentation. We can say case 1, case 2, case 3, case 4, case 5. We can keep on explaining. But definitely at the tribal level, what has happened is the tribes that are continuing to live in forest, for them, their PC is getting significantly hurt.
Yeah.
And if PC is hurt, then aesthetics will also get hurt. And if continuously the lived ecosystem is getting harmed, their sacred is also hurt. That's why the Bishnois respond so heavily when Krishna Mriga is killed.
Mm-hmm.
So because the attack to the sacred is so much that they have now you know begun to respond in a very fierce manner. So case by case we'll have to go and say that in each community's case, the PCARS harm will be different. In
Mm-hmm.
some cases, they're all there, but interface is lost. If interface is lost, slowly, gradually, PCRS will die. So these are the explanations that we have to develop in various contexts.
So this brings two questions in my mind. One is the question of reservation. So we've seen that again, reservation furthers this very uniform idea of development, which has in some way worked for emancipation of the SCs, but it hasn't for the STs. So now, when you talk about modernizing these nodes, do you think that maybe the Indian Forest Services and the confluence of the tribal jatis would probably be the way to go when it comes to modernizing that node? Sort of promoting
So
people
we have
going
to.
into that.
So the thing is, so that's the question that I had in my mind also
Mm,
as to what is the reconstruction that we have
mm.
to achieve. Now, whether we will be able to reconstruct a complete network is kind of not clear. But what may happen is that we may be at once in multiple nodes. That is what is happening.
Mm,
Because if father will be in police, mother will be, in the telecom department. So already you have PCARS of two different communities.
exactly.
And family from its past has its own PCRS.
Yeah.
Right? And if children are already grown up, they'll have there. So if in a family of 4, it's possible that you have 5 PCARS
Mm.
conflicting. Now, we don't know what the resolution is yet. So I don't want to make a claim that we know the solution.
Yeah,
But
which is,
we
please go
have to
ahead.
recognize that we are living in a, even when we are living in a family, we are experiencing what 5 different nodes would have offered in the past in a unique manner. Point number
Mm.
1. That too in a diminished way, because in some cases, in some of those contexts, if you're in an army, there is a higher sense of secret. If you're in the software industry, there is a very low sense of sacred. So you will have 5, 6 different kinds of PCRs conflicting, and we will not be in a position to resolve without proper leadership.
Mm.
So the one of the objectives with which I have framed this is to be able to explain the conflict that we are going. The enormity of the conflict is that when a node had a single PCRS, striving for stability was so difficult. Now, when you have 5 different node experiences at the same time, a higher order consciousness is required to strike, stability within a single family, leave alone across nodes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not clear. Solution is not clear, but the problem is clear.
Yeah, because you said that there are two types of communities that are recognized in India. One is the Kula wise, and then it's the Jati wise. So
Yeah,
Kula wise, there's a lot of if somebody does Gotra adherence, then there is promulgation of interconnectedness and complex making of the network. But then that does not stand true for Jatis because then there's just too much confluence for somebody to carry forward it.
correct.
And which brings me to the question that what are the junctions at which these nodes meet? Because you said that there is eventually going to be a part where two PCRS they meet eventually. So like we talked about the temple economy in the last talk. So that seems to be one of the junctions at which
Yes,
they
yeah,
can meet.
absolutely. That's the moment you are able to build a common S,
Hmm.
that is the binding part.
Very true. So
So
there
then
could be
what
the
happens?
temple.
All the PCRs gets PCAR kind of
Hmm.
realigns themselves over a period
Right.
of time. If you allow it to settle down, then
Right.
it settles down. So now we are not able to strike that dimension. Let's say if cities develop a commonness,
Hmm.
a significant melting can happen.
Hmm.
But secular universe is not allowing that dimension to evolve.
So maybe the
See,
reconstruction of
Jagannath
S
Puri
would be
is
the.
being the yeah, absolutely. The Jagannath Puri being Jagannath being the presiding deity of Odisha has brought a lot of stability to Odisha in spite of
Right.
so much conflict. So
So
in
sir, what?
Mysore, anything can happen, but for to everybody in Mysore, Chamundeshwari is supreme. So
Yes.
there ends the conflict.
Yeah. So then, in that case, some of the solutions would be maybe reconstruction of the junctions at which the PCRS interact, and maybe realigning the way we think of development and also realigning the way we think about reservations. Because if we could tell the STs that there is no need for you to leave the family legacy that you come from, because those are things that we don't know from our books. So that kind of conservation of the forest's resources is something that only they bring to the table. So.
Not just that, there has to
Mhm.
be more shared sacred with them. That's the starting
Yes,
point.
yes.
That is the key thing. See, the
Mm,
moment you recognize the other sacred, then
mm,
new aesthetics, new rituals, your
mm.
own tempering of performances, everything happens. So honoring the sacred is an extremely important thing. So even in the old Jagannath Puri story, I don't know if people should read that. That's such a universal story. So the king sends somebody to the forest, and then there is a new relationship that gets built between the kingdom and the forest tribe. Something extraordinary happens. That's a universal phenomena. Right now, that phenomenon has to happen in large scale and complexity. So when you recognize the sacred, new performances, new consumption will evolve, and a new balance will arrive.
Thank you for that very astute talk, sir, and some very interesting ideas that were bounced off of this. Uh, we are going to definitely have some more offshoots of this Purusharth conversation to go on. and several lined up for our viewers. Thank you very much. Let's see you
Thank
again,
you very
sir.
much, Rashmi. Namaste. Good
Namaste.
night.